Here are 2 true scary stories from Reddit. The links to the stories are in the description below. Enjoy. Number 1. This incident happened about 6 months ago, and I just recently took an Uber for the first time since then, so I thought I'd share. For reference, I'm a woman in my mid-20s with an average build. I'm not tall or strong, and I'm definitely not threatening in any way. I had left a bar around midnight where myself and coworkers had gathered for a work function. The bar was located in a large city about an hour away from my suburban home that I shared with my boyfriend. I was only slightly buzzed when I left, having had only 3 drinks the entire night, so I wasn't incapacitated in any considerable way. Anyway, I'd ordinarily take a company car home, but I hadn't reserved one since I didn't know what time I'd be leaving, so I just decided to take Uber. The company I'm employed at would reimburse me for the Uber bill anyway, so it made no difference to me. Once the Uber pulled up, I said goodbye to my colleagues and hopped in the back seat. I'm always very nice to the drivers, so I introduced myself. This driver seemed totally normal. There were no red flags thrown up, and we were having a pleasant conversation throughout the drive. I learned he lived in a neighborhood that wasn't too far from my home. I will say, his neighborhood, while relatively nearby, would be completely out of the way of the route we were taking to my house. The conversation had reached its natural end, so I just sat quietly, looking at my phone. The quiet, however, was interrupted by his voice, suggesting I'd take a nap if I felt tired. This didn't strike me as weird at first, so I just thanked him and assured him I wasn't that tired. He then said, "Oh, I always get sleepy when I'm drunk. Are you sure?" At this point, something inside snapped me wide awake. I replied that I wasn't drunk, and like I said, I just had a few drinks, so there was no need to nap. I'll be home soon enough anyway. He dropped it after that, but I still thought it was weird that he'd say that. About 5 minutes later, he said the highway had some construction going on and that the single lane traffic up ahead would make my trip way longer than it needed to be. He asked if it was okay to take another route. I reluctantly obliged and was already on edge and just wanted to get home. My boyfriend called at that moment asking when I'd be there. I made sure to make it very clear that I was talking to my significant other. Something was strange about this guy, and I wanted him to know that someone was expecting me at a specific time and knew where I was. I hung up the phone and the driver remained quiet. We got off the highway on a different exit than I've used before, but guessed that was to be expected on a different route home. I'm bullshitting on my phone, not looking up, because I don't even want to talk to this guy anymore. He then said, "My house is only 5 minutes from here." Okay, I thought. I felt a deep pit in my stomach. We're probably a good 25 minutes away from my house right now because of his quote-unquote shortcut. I said some nonsense about how I liked the neighborhood and how my boyfriend and I were thinking of moving here. I was basically saying anything I could think of to not make it seem that I was very uncomfortable, and this was extremely weird. He didn't respond to anything I just said and started driving on a road that I knew was in the direction of my house. Crisis averted, right? Except, not really. Several long minutes passed and I noticed that the surroundings were more familiar. Just as I'm beginning to feel at ease, he started asking questions about my boyfriend. What does he do? How long have we been together? And other seemingly normal questions. Finally, with about 10 minutes to go, he asked if my boyfriend made me happy. He does, very much. I gushed a bit. Then he asked if I made him happy. I thought that was weird, but humor's my defense mechanism, so I replied with, "Well, I should hope so." It's close to 1 a.m. at this point, and I'm just 8 minutes away from home. He then turned off onto a side street and pulled over. He looked back at me over the headrest and asked if I'd make him happy too. I said, "What?" Mostly because I can't even believe what's happening. He asks again, "Do you want to make me happy tonight?" I took a second to think through my options. I'm alone with this guy who's behind the wheel. This street's dark and I don't see any lights on from the nearby houses. Plus, I don't know what the hell this guy has in his car. I defaulted to the response that many women know to be a true barrier to a man's advances. I don't think my boyfriend would like that very much. His creepy grin fell away from his face. Then he said, "He doesn't have to find out. Come on, make me happy. I know a few ways you can start." I tell him my boyfriend is expecting me home any minute, and besides I love him and don't want to hurt him. So can you please just take me home? I carry a small knife and a little canister of mace, but all I could think of was to appeal to this guy's sensitive side. Somehow it worked, and he didn't say another word after that. He turned back around and silently drove me home. For some reason, I blurted out thanks as I got out of the car. Old habits die hard, I guess, and that was that. I get in the house and started crying immediately. I hug my boyfriend and he tells me that I need to contact Uber right away and tell them what just happened, so that this guy doesn't try to take advantage of anyone else. I agreed and pulled up the app to file a complaint. When the app opened up and I looked at my last ride, I froze. The picture in the profile was not the same guy who drove me home. The car was the same, but not the driver. The guy in the photo had a brown complexion, wore a turban, and was possibly in his early 40s. The guy who drove me home was white and seemed just slightly older than me. In the end, Uber never followed up with me and just refunded my money. I did tell the police what happened, but they didn't take me seriously since nothing actually happened. I was worried for a while that I might see the guy again, since he knew where I lived. For now, I've put it behind me, as I just took an Uber today. Moral of the story: always make sure that the photo in your Uber driver's profile matches the person who's driving the car. And to the creepy driver that didn't actually work for Uber, let's not meet. Number 2. This story starts on a Thursday night in May of 2017. I worked in retail, and after a long shift one night, I called Uber as to avoid the dodgy people that hung around the train station. I wish I had known that this one simple act of calling for transportation would lead to a 6-month-long ordeal of harassment and obsession. When Uber arrived, I got into the car and chatted with the middle-aged driver, who I'll call T. He had a strong, possibly Turkish accent and seemed friendly. The conversation was normal at first, with him asking where I worked and why I was out so late and what I was studying, etc. As the conversation progressed, he began to make comments that started to make me feel uncomfortable. He commented on how pretty I was and how young I looked. He reminisced about the times when he was young and could pick up girls like me. He then placed his hand on my knee and patted it affectionately. He tried to gently brush my hair out of my face, and I was very aware that he was controlling a moving vehicle. So I just ignored him and prayed we would get to our destination sooner. We finally arrived at my place, and when he noticed a car in the driveway, he immediately pulled back his hand. Then he asked if I wanted to go out for a coffee sometime. I politely declined and said that I had a boyfriend. He told me my boyfriend was a lucky man and I could call him anytime for a free ride. He then reached out and kissed my hand. I felt physically sick, but thanked him for the ride and got out as quick as possible. As soon as I was inside, I told my boyfriend what had happened and he told me to report him immediately. I was apprehensive at first because he knew my address, but eventually I reported it as I knew we were moving away from here soon. I was reassured by Uber that the matter would be investigated and received a full refund for the trip. I didn't hear anything from T after that and was soon busy working, studying, and moving to a new house. I had forgotten all about him until around August, where by chance I ran into him in our local cafe. I was in line to get a coffee when I had a tap on the shoulder. My heart sank. I turned around and it was T. He gave me a big smile and tried to give me a hug, which I declined. "Hey, I've missed your pretty face. Where have you been?" "I'm super busy, sorry, I can't really talk," I uttered. I hastily ordered my coffee and burst out the door with him hot on my tail. He started walking beside me, matching my pace. I began breathing heavily and hyperventilating. "Hey, so I could have bought you that coffee. We still need to go out on that coffee date." I told him no. I was not interested and that he was making me uncomfortable. He then grabbed my hand as we were walking. I yanked my hand back and yelled, "What the fuck? What are you doing?" Oh, too soon? Too soon? Too soon for what? We're not on a date. I'm not interested. Leave me alone! I said this loud enough for people around to hear, and a few had turned around when I got their attention. Oh, are you a lesbian or something? No! I'm just not interested in you! I was mortified. I had officially lost it and started crying. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you, he said, and he tried to pat my back. I physically flinched and walked away from him, close to having a complete mental breakdown. He called out behind me as I was leaving, "You still work at the generic shoe store, right?" I realized then I had told him where I worked that night and that he had picked me up and seen me in uniform. I had also told him where and what I studied. I couldn't believe my stupidity. I alerted my store manager, who then alerted the shopping center security, who then assured me that they would be on the lookout. Sure enough, my first shift back after the cafe incident, my manager told me that someone had come in asking for my phone number and when I was due on my next shift, claiming to be my boyfriend. My manager refused to give out this information and immediately notified security, but by the time they arrived, he had already left. They showed me the grainy security footage of people coming into our store around that time, and sure enough, it was T. I was told that if he came in again, I was to go hide out in the back and that the other girls would deal with him. A few months later, he tried to add me on Facebook, but I declined. I also immediately changed my name on Uber so I couldn't be identified anymore and blocked him. The most recent incident happened last September. I was tidying up the front window display when I suddenly had the feeling of being watched. I had a quick look to my left, and sure enough, T was there. I pretended not to recognize him and asked, "Can I help you, sir?" "Just admiring your beauty," he said with a smile. He then gave me an envelope and walked out before I could say anything. Inside was a card saying that he really felt a connection and he thanked me for my help today, even though I never once helped him. There was also a $100 voucher for the local bikini store. I realize now is the time to involve the police, and I'm kicking myself for not contacting them in the first place. I haven't heard from him since, and I'm praying that I don't ever hear from him again. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed. Until next time.